Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Can you hear me in the back? Karen, can you hear me? Great. Okay, we wanted to see if we can get started on time, so that's why I'm starting. What I'd like to do is to, first of all, welcome you. I'm delighted to see you here as we begin this new grand enterprise. And so I'm going to just take you through a few things. This particular session that we're doing, we're calling Encouraging and Assessing Reflection. I'm going to give you an introduction. The bulk of it is going to be done by my colleague, Ellen Goldman. Dr. Goldman is with the School of Education, for those of you who may not know her.
Medicine and Health Sciences.
And she's with the School of Medicine and Health Sciences also. In any case. Okay, so I want to briefly go over tonight's schedule with you. First of all, what we're going to do, our objectives are, first of all, to describe the professional development theme, abbreviated as PD. Number two, to identify ways to encourage and assess reflection. That's the bulk of what we're doing here. Number three, to give you an opportunity to practice the assessment of reflection using a rubric. The schedule, this is your welcome, followed by encouraging and assessing reflection, which Ellen will take us through. And then finally, we'll have an open forum for any questions that you may have about anything and to discuss anything that you'd like to discuss. Okay, a brief review, because we have some new people here who were not at the previous session. What's become of POM? POM used to be, or still is, I guess, in a sense, is DPS, PBL, and CAP. DPS is Doctor, Patient, and Society. PBL is Problem-Based Learning, and CAP is the Clinical Apprenticeship. And that has been transformed, or will be transformed, into PD, Professional Development, which has many similarities to Doctor, Patient, and Society. CSR, Clinical Skills and Reasoning, which has many similarities to PBL and also has some similarities to DPS. And CAP stays the same. The reason we're doing it is we're building a better, more muscular, more integrated doctoring course. Okay, so what I'm going to briefly review these items. First of all, some of the key innovations in the revised curriculum, number one. Number two, say a few things about some of those innovations, like the blocks and themes, the learning communities and the intersessions, and then finally mention debriefs, which we are defining as episodes in which reflection is used for biomedical and interprofessional growth. If you have any questions, ask me as we go along. Okay, key innovations of the revised curriculum. Number one, it is 18 months for the first part of it, instead of the usual 24 months. So there is more clinical time. Number two, there are blocks and themes, which lead to more integration. Previously, we had a discipline-based curriculum in which biochemistry taught biochemistry and physiology taught physiology. What's happening is that all these subjects are being integrated in blocks around organ system-based areas like GI and cardiovascular. The next innovation is that we're having learning communities. Learning communities is a way to divide the class into groups of 30. There are 6 learning communities. You've all been grouped by your association with learning communities. It gives us an opportunity to work with students in smaller groups and to provide better and more mentoring. And lastly, we have intersessions. After every semester, there will be a 1-week intersession. That intersession will encompass many things, but one of the things that we'll be involved in directly as PD mentors is going through reflection and giving students a chance to take stock of what's happened over the previous semester and decide how they could use that information to improve themselves as they go forward. Okay, blocks and themes. Quickly, the blocks are foundations, I3, immunology, hematology, inflammation, and infectious disease. cardiology, pulmonary and renal, GI and liver, musculoskeletal and rheumatology, endocrine and reproduction, and brain and behavior. The themes are human behavior and development across the life cycle, clinical skills in reasoning, professional development, which includes ethics, wellness, teamwork and leadership, humanity, spirituality. Spirituality broadly defined, and we'll define it more broadly in just a few minutes. Public health and diversity. So those are the blocks, those are the themes. The blocks happen horizontally as the curriculum marches forward. The themes are vertically integrated. Okay, learning communities and intercessions. To talk about them, we have to go to look and see what the goals of professional development are. And one of the most important goals of the professional development theme to mentor students along two pathways. And those two pathways are number one, biomedical growth, and number two, inner growth. The reason being to graduate doctors who are capable of addressing physical, emotional, and spiritual suffering. The methods that professional development uses, close longitudinal mentor-student relationships, and the use of reflection for both biomedical and inner growth. The learning communities and intercessions allow the small group mentoring environment in which we can achieve these goals. So how do students progress along the two professional development pathways? We're using episodes which we're calling debriefs. And these are episodes in which students do self-directed learning. And they're directed at biomedical and inner growth. And let me just go over those in a little bit more detail to try to explain them better. Biomedical growth. Students would reflect on an experience, which could be called a critical event or a critical incident, or they may reflect on an assignment. And when they reflect on it, they would describe it, they would analyze it, and then they would plan changes that they may want to make in the way they do things. They would then next formulate the changes into an individualized learning plan, which would mean things which they would like to do further, things which they would like to do better. And then lastly, set criteria for evaluating the changes which they make. In other words, evaluating outcomes. In the biomedical growth pathway, the mentor's role is to facilitate self-directed learning through feedback and guidance. In that situation, the mentor is the host to the student. The inner growth portion of it is a little bit different. Students would reflect on an experience or a critical event or an assignment, just like in biomedical growth, but it would be aimed at they're seeking new perspectives, insights, connections, inspiration. The mentor's role here is a little bit different. It's to facilitate self-discovery and exploration of inner values through their comments, encouragement, and support. And so in this instance, the mentor is the guest and the student is the host. So overall, what does it look like? Students have experiences. Those experiences could be in the blocks. They could be in clinical skills and reasoning. It could be in professional development. After the experience, they meet together, or they do separately. They do debriefs, which is a way for them to process that. They have further experiences. They do further debriefs. And gradually, they build up and up and up. And each of the arrows are different colors because they represent the two different pathways. And eventually, they become, when they graduate GW, self-directed, compassionate doctors. That's the objective. Okay, so in summary, what I've just talked about are, first of all, the key innovations in the revised curriculum, the blocks and themes and how they work, learning communities, intercessions, and debriefs, the episodes in which reflection is used for biomedical and interprofessional growth. So we know where we'd like these pathways to lead for the student. Where do they lead for you as mentors? Ideally, the pathways are parallel. The biomedical and inner growth of students is paralleled by our own biomedical and inner growth. So we follow the same pathway, only at a different level. And that is an overview of what we're doing. Any questions that you have or any thoughts or comments?
I didn't understand the last thing at all. Can you kind of describe that for me?
The very last slide.
The very last, yeah.
Right.
I
So-
don't see where I'm going to have biomedical growth.
How about sociologic and psychologic and skills growth?
Okay, that makes more sense.
You know, we're just so enmeshed in this medical model. It's hard to figure out.
I'm going to ask for translation as I go along.
Good.
Okay. All right. So I'm looking around the room, and I really don't know most of you, and you, so you don't know me either. But I'm just going to take 2 seconds and tell you what my background is, so you have a context for why I'm doing this. As Jim noted, I am a faculty member in the School of Education. I'm also a faculty member in the School of Medicine and Health Sciences. And I've been working since last September very closely with Dr. Mintz, Matt Mintz, to revise the undergraduate medical curriculum. So we have been having a lot of fun playing with the blocks and the themes and everything else, and working with the faculty. And my main job in that has been to provide faculty development sessions such as this to help the faculty who are trying to adopt active learning techniques in their teaching and design things from an instructional design perspective, etc. So I am very familiar with the curriculum, even though I'm not a doctor. But I probably have knowledge enough to be dangerous at the same time about medicine, but a lot of experience. So at any rate, my role here tonight is to help you prepare for your very first reflection assignment that you're going to be involved in with the students at the end of the first week. So at the end of the first week, the first Friday afternoon, there's a 4-hour block of time. You'll be looking at what the students are doing during that time, but essentially they're going to do a team building exercise. Then they're going to reflect on that team building exercise by talking about it as a group, when they have some specific assignments to do, and then they will be asked to write a written reflection about themselves as a team member, what they contribute well, what they don't do so well that they might need to work on. And they're going to have been in teams for almost 2 solid weeks, because as you know, when they come in for orientation, they're doing a lot of teamwork exercises around the community. The entire first week of foundations is filled with group activities of various sorts. So they'll be doing this reflection based on sort of their immediate past 2 weeks on the teams with their peer students. So tonight what we're going to do for about 30 minutes is just review some basics of reflection, because the basics are important to helping you know how to interact with the students to encourage them to be more reflective, not only in that first assignment, but over time. And when I asked at the June's faculty development session for the mentors, how many of you have actually executed reflection assignments, many of you said you had never done it. My guess is that you really have, because every time you ask a student a question, you're asking them to reflect. Because reflection is just based on asking good questions that are thought-provoking. So you've probably done much more reflection with students than you think you have. Some of you in the room have done very organized reflective assignments. What you will be able to do by the end of tonight is understand the rubric to be used to grade these reflective assignments. And yes, they can be graded. And you will practice with some write-ups that we've mocked up of what the students might submit to you. Equally important to grading it appropriately is providing the right type of feedback. In fact, probably the feedback to the students is more important than the actual grade. Okay? So we're going to go through a lot of information. I want to caution you that this packet, which you see here, you all have this, and it goes on both sides. I'm not going to go through every page. This is for you to take with you, and it is in PowerPoint, and I don't usually lecture, let alone for PowerPoint, but I prepared it so that you could take it as a self-study and use it over time. So we are not going to go through every single page of this. But to get us going, I'd like you to think about the last time that you were trying to get a student to reflect, whether it was a whole class or a small group or one-on-one, and tell me what went well about that situation when you tried to get a student to do a reflection. Something must have gone right. Don't raise your hand, just shout out.
Well, in the group, they made the first statement, or they went first.
So they talked.
Somebody talked.
Okay? So you didn't have that dead silence. It seemed like it was 2 hours long, but it was really only maybe 20 seconds.
But you get it.
Yeah, okay. What else went well?
Somebody else jumped in right after that.
Okay. So the dialogue was going on. What about the quality of reflection? Were you happy with it? Did you think it was deep enough? Was it reflective enough?
Not always.
Not always. Okay, so let's flip to the side of what doesn't always go so well. So what can go wrong, or what have you experienced that's given you difficulty in giving students reflective assignments?
They don't want to do it.
Yeah, why is that?
So I think some students think that this is squishy and why am I doing this? I'm here to go to medical school. And I'm going to be, this is not the biomedical stuff.
Not hard science.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? What do you have trouble with? You have trouble getting them to do it? Other issues?
Shifting topics.
Shifting topics. You're shifting the topic or they're shifting the topic?
They are the group, they shift the topic,
Okay, so you're doing group reflection.
usually.
And you start out somewhere and you think you're going down a path and they're taking off over here. And you don't like that.
Well, it just feels as though it's not as focused.
Okay? Other issues with reflection assignments that you've given students?
Reflection fatigue.
Fatigue, too many of them.
Well, because that's a word that is used a lot nowadays. And we're constantly telling students to reflect, to reflect, to reflect. So for some students, I think it just gets to be a hoop that they have to jump through.
So what do they think they're doing when you're asking them to do this reflection, Adam?
Completing an assignment, sometimes.
Check the box,
Yeah.
I did it. Okay, I see some heads nodding. Other issues with reflection?
The reflection tends to be too academic, and there's sometimes a feeling that by identifying areas for improvement or vulnerabilities, it'll impact their score or how it's graded.
Okay. What do you mean by too academic? Help me understand that a little bit.
So focusing more on the raw science and material versus how they perhaps interacted on more of a human level, or how the information personally affected them.
Okay. So when you give these assignments, why are you asking the students to reflect? What's the purpose? Maybe we should take a step back. What's reflection?
Looking at an event, and considering where you were in that event, what you did wrong, what you did right, or what you feel good about,
Okay.
and how the other person or people in that incident might have been affected, what their reactions were. The
Great
whole thing.
definition. Okay. Other thoughts on what it is? Go ahead.
I think sometimes a reflection really is designed not to just focus on outcome, but on the process. How did you get there?
Yeah. Okay. So it could be on the content. We call it the content of what happens. It could be on the process. So just to...
It could be focused on current, past, or future.
Ah, what a great lead-in. Thank you, Bob. Okay, so on page 3 of your packet, you've got this page of definitions. I'm really interested in the one at the top. Reflection's a metacognitive process. It's a thought process that occurs before during and after situations. Sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. But it can occur before something. Some people call that preflection. Doesn't really sound that good. During, if you can stop the action while you're doing something, and certainly after is the one that we had the eloquent first definition of, with the purpose of developing greater understanding of both yourself or themselves and the situation, so that something is going to change in the future. So the purpose is that you're going to get a different result in some way, shape, or form in the future than what you got, even if what you got was pretty good. So you can look through some of the rest of these reflections, or rest of these definitions. Some people want to know more about Mezirow and critical reflection, so you have that for you. So why is it so important for the medical students to reflect? Whether they have fatigue from it or not. Why do we need to get them to do it? Why is this so important?
It's a building process.
Of what? What's it building?
You're building your skills, you're building your comfort,
Mm-hmm.
you're building your understanding of yourself so that you're acting appropriately.
Okay. What else is it doing, Matt?
So a lot of the medical student experience, especially in the third year, but even the preclinical years, is experience. And so it's one thing to go study a textbook and read and learn that material. But if you're learning from experience, unless you're metacognitive about it, you're not going to think about that experience, and therefore you're not going to really learn. So it's really necessary for learning from experience.
Okay. Bob?
Reflection is a skill that has to be built into practice as a physician.
Because if you don't, what will happen?
You won't improve.
And you might what?
Sorry, I ended, but can you guess what I'm thinking?
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
reflection teaches you to be present
Yep.
in the moment. Because for medical students, a lot of things are happening at the same time. And unless you go back and reflect on those things, you miss those things. So.
Okay. Good. So lots of purposes. The first one is it just enables you to codify what you're really learning. So if you don't stop occasionally and you're having all this experience, particularly in the clinical setting, and you never stop and say, what have I really learned here about X? Whether X is how to communicate with a person, or X is how to work as a member of a clinical team, etc., it doesn't really get codified in your own mind. And some of the students say, and I've heard you all tell me this, they say we're not teaching them anything, or they're not learning anything. Well, they're learning a ton, because all they have to do is be in the environment and they're going to learn a ton, right? So the practice of reflection helps codify what it is that I've actually learned in that last shift that I did with you, etc. It helps develop critical thinking. If you've got to stop and think about something, okay, you're going to go to hopefully, you're going to go to a higher order of thinking, because you've got to integrate these pieces. You've got to, put the dots together. It could transform your perspective. It could be the kind of reflection where you stop and say, that happened and I was really uncomfortable with it and I don't know why, and I didn't understand John's perspective. So I'm going to think about where he was coming from. So it could help transform your knowledge of somebody else's perspective, or help you have a different perspective on an event because you're looking at it through other eyes. Improves decision making and problem solving by giving you some space, by stepping back for a moment. Okay? Encourages deep learning, and then promotes action taking. So one of the reasons that the students may not want to do this, as Matt said, is because they don't understand why they're doing it and why is it so important. So I didn't know the whole experience of the room. So we clearly have some people in here more experienced than others at reflective assignments. So if you want, there is a worksheet, and you don't all have to do this, but you can think about your last reflective assignment with a student and fill this out as we go along, and then compare it to sort of the knowledge from the literature that I'm giving you. So those of you with more experience, this is a way of you not being so bored that, I've heard this 1,000 times, why is she telling me about why people need to do reflection?
Can you tell me what when you said, talk about your last reflective assignment. I don't believe I've ever had a reflective assignment, so I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Same here. Something you might have been involved in one of the POM courses where you asked the students to do a reflection paper, or where you, Matt, you got to help me out here because I don't know what people are getting, what these folks have asked.
Well,
sometimes
sometimes at the end of every DPS session, we ask the group to come together and to actually reflect on what's happened during the session and try to identify things that went well, things that maybe could have been done better, and then to think about what they want to do differently next time.
So that could be a reflection. It could be that you've had a student, a resident, a fellow that's having a particularly difficult time with something, and you're asking them to think about how they've been on a rotation with you or whatever, and come and talk to you about it. So you've asked them to reflect, and now you're taking that. Okay? Does that help? Who is the other person that was having trouble? It must be okay. All right, so couple things. This has already come up. Some people don't realize that there's group reflection and public reflection as well as individual. So this slide's just there for that. As I said, I'm not going to cover everything. This is a really important page, probably one of the most important in the whole packet. So we talked about how reflection can be before an activity, okay, during it or after it. There are also major levels of reflection, and those are the rows going across. So forget about the content in the middle. You can have reflection on content, and Jim's example was just that. What happened? Why did that go on, etc. Process reflection is a little different. Process reflection asks you to talk about how something occurred and how you might have wanted it to occur differently. So this is the tactical blocking and tackling, what actually occurred. And the process is more, how did it roll out? Okay? And the deepest level of reflection that you've got is premise reflection. Why did it happen that way? Or why did you feel that way? So a student might have gotten very angry in a situation. Okay? Well, what happened that caused them to be angry? How did it occur? Why did you get so angry? So the real reflective stuff is going to come if you can get the reflection to be deeper, which in part is your charge as their mentors. Reflection happens when you ask people questions. It happens a lot of other ways too, but the biggest single thing that prompts reflection is being asked a question. So what you have in these cells are some good questions to ask depending on the type of reflection, the timing of the reflection before an event, during it, or after, and whether you want the student to reflect on content, process, or premise. It's hard to have somebody, it's hard to start with, why are you so upset if you haven't gotten to what happened? So you've got to work your way kind of down to this level. So this is a key takeaway for questions that will prompt reflection of, frankly, anybody. Okay? What I wanted to illustrate was the different types, the different timing, and the different levels of reflection. So on your sheet, you can, for those of you that are doing it, you write in the purpose of the reflective assignment and then just circle. Was it individual or collective? What was the nature of it? And what was the timing of it? Because this sheet is oriented as a design worksheet to making it better next time you do the assignment. But in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on to this topic of why don't the students like it. So there are a couple of things that prohibit reflection from being done very well, and you mentioned some of them. The students don't like it, they have fatigue, etc. So if the learner doesn't perceive reflection as, or perceives reflection as soft, as Matt indicated, so it's not worth my time, or I don't know your name in the back, but you were talking about, well, if I really tell them what I think, or I really tell them how I feel, somebody might react or think poorly of me or give me a lower grade or a bad write-up or whatever, okay? I find that with students and faculty, and I teach an adult learning course in the master teacher program, and faculty right now are doing a reflection paper for me. And one of the things that people have is they describe what happened rather than thinking deeply about it. Okay? So it's difficult. Barriers to effective reflection means that you've got to get past the description of the whole event. You're not writing Gone with the Wind. You're writing about your thoughts. Okay? You're not writing a novel. As faculty, we also create a lot of barriers to good reflection. So we might have a bad attitude, and you know when we have a bad attitude, it shows, right? So if we don't like reflection, or we say, I know you're not going to like this assignment, but do it anyway, it's good for you, eat your spinach, right? Okay? We're projecting something, so I don't expect very much out of you then if you're the student, okay? We might not use it a lot, so if we don't use it routinely in our teaching, the students aren't going to get much better at it. We don't know how to assess it. When I asked you in June how many of you assessed reflection, actually graded it, I got one hand in a room of 40 people. And some of you said to me privately, I can't really assess somebody else's thoughts. You can't, but you can assess their thought process. And that's the rubric that we're going to show you, okay? That's your hook for later. Some students think that my learning style doesn't favor reflection. Okay, so I'm no good at it. I actually had a faculty member say that to me the other day in class. But the fact of the matter is that whether your learning style favors it or not, you know, it's a good thing, and you need to develop all styles of learning, so that's a poor excuse. And you can see that there are some process problems. It requires, like anything else, practice and feedback, right? I don't have the feedback here, but it requires deliberate practice and feedback, the stuff that works in learning anything. The assignments have to be relevant to the learner, or they're not going to want to do it. And the feedback is often not there, or the feedback is a check mark. Okay, they did the assignment, they got their 5 points, and my response to that is, if that's all you're doing, don't bother doing it. You're not going to really grade it and give people feedback. So some of the barriers. So those of you that are using the sheet might think on the reflection assignment that I gave students, what were the barriers? Yes, please.
Under the learner, I don't know whether you would consider this part of thinking deeply, but there's also the feeling deeply, and that, given that if you're talking clinical experience and medical students, those can be painful feelings and so it's easier to push it aside.
And what do you tell people to do with their feelings in a medical setting? Right. Take a break, go away, take a few minutes, compose yourself, and come back, right? So that works against us getting deep reflection. I'm not saying that that direction is wrong, because if I were the next patient, I would want you composed, okay? But we're kind of doing things that hurt ourselves if we want to promote reflection. All right, so how do we motivate it? It's the flip side. The students have to understand why reflection is important. It's that simple. So you can think about, those of you that are using the worksheet can think about what's your motivational hook. You need to reflect about this, because if you don't, you could kill somebody if you do it incorrectly, or whatever the motivation is. That's a pretty strong one. The reflection's got to be connected to the... Isn't that funny, Phil? The reflection has to be connected to the topic at hand. So if they're going to do a team building exercise, you want to do a reflection on them as a team member. You don't want to do a reflection on what was it like to do, I don't know, the Oliver Mann thing that they did on day one. You got to relate it very quickly to whatever the event is. It's got to be explicit, and it has to be done in a safe manner, and I'm sure you're all going to do that. So I'm not going to worry about the safe environment, because you all know about creating that. Okay, so there's got to be motivation that has to be clear. The next thing is, what's the assignment? So I'm not going to go through these. These are lists for you to look at of common types of reflection assignments. So you may look at these and find that I really was doing a lot of reflection assignments. I just didn't call it that. So if I was working with a student on a review of a critical incident, you were helping them reflect. Okay? Again, the biggest thing is asking a question to prompt reflection. So these are activities within assignments that you could ask students to do if you wanted to prompt reflection. We're going to talk about writing tonight, but any of these will work. Take a different position. Look at this through the eyes of the nurse. Look at this through the eyes of the family member of the patient, etc. Okay? And then this is a page, another page of questions. Again, to help you prompt a reflective experience for the students. Okay. So then we come to this issue of, can you assess reflection and how do you assess it? So some of you that have assigned reflection, what have you done to assess it? Anybody brave enough to throw that at me? You check it off, they did the assignment, we give them 5 points or whatever. Yes? No? Adam, all these reflections you're assigning people, what do you do? Put you on the spot.
Well, I don't really assign reflections, but when I'm working with medical students in clinic, I constantly ask them. I don't like to use the word reflect too much, because again, I think that there's a lot of students hear that word and it sort of turns them off. But I ask them, okay, so what was surprising about this encounter? What's one thing that you're going to take away that you're going to apply to the next patient? So those are my little prompts. Now, as far as assessing their reflection, when we see another patient maybe that's similar to the patient they saw before, then I try to see if they can go
It's
back
all on
to
the action. So those are great questions. Your sort of assessment, if you will, is, did I see a change in behavior? Okay? So you're assessing behavior, not reflection, which is okay too, because ultimately we want that to change. Matt?
I would say the answer, at the end of the day, the answer is the same. And this is why we're having this session, because we've done reflective activities in POM, but we haven't assessed it. I think another way that we try to get close to this is often our reflections serve the purpose of stimulating conversation. So we don't assess the reflection, but if the students are participating and talking, we sort of evaluate them on, participation or, so, and maybe subjectively, if a student is reflecting deeply, maybe we recall that when we give them our subjective evaluations at the end of the course.
Yeah.
But it's not this sort of assessment of what level of reflection. It's sort of behavior. It goes back.
Yeah, so what could happen in that sense is that Ron is talking a lot. So he gets high marks and lots of praise because he's been participating. But Judy really said the really deep thought thing, and she was quiet and only talked once.
Right.
Okay? So you might end up sort of rewarding, I don't want to say the wrong behavior, but not the best behavior that you wanted to see. Okay? Something else you said, and it's escaped me because it's the end of the day. But moving on to this issue of assessment. As I said before, we have problems assessing reflection, and it isn't just you. I actually gave this entire presentation in May at the Lilly National Conference of University and College Teachers. So everybody teaching everything. And we had like 60 people in the room. Margaret Plack and I did it. And out of all of them, there were 2 people that said that they graded reflection, and everybody else said, oh boy, I really have problems with that. So the question is, we don't like it because we feel that it's subjective. So not only are we asking the students to do something they might think is squishy, now we're being squishy in our assessment. So the way to think about it is that we're not assessing the content. We're not assessing whether you gained knowledge or changed behavior. If we're assessing reflection, we're assessing the reflective process. Did they think deeply and widely? So did they think deeply in terms of the premise reflection? Why did I react that way? Why did it bother me so much? Or maybe it didn't bother me and it should have. But also, widely, did I look at the situation from other people's perspectives? Okay? So that's the question you're asking in part when you start assessing reflection. Not the content, but the process. Did I think deeply and did I think widely? Okay? Also, if we don't have a rubric for grading it, we don't have specified learning outcomes, you don't know what you're going to get, right? And the students don't know what you want. So telling them in advance what you're looking for. Okay, so far? So the crash course that I'm only going to spend 2 minutes on because Jim really didn't want me to cover this and I felt it was important, so he said, okay, you can have 2 minutes, is how do you go about assessing a reflective assignment? And there's really 3 steps, and I'm not going to cover all the detail, but the first thing is how much is it worth? So you will see in the reflective assignments that your students are assigned in the professional development section of the curriculum. They might be assigned 5 points for a reflective assignment in a course of 100 points total, where 30 points is a multiple choice test or 2, and then there are other assignments. So the first thing is, what is the relative value? What % of the final grade does the reflection count for? Now, if it doesn't count at all, what's the issue?
Who's going to do it?
Right. Why should I bother? I got tests to study for. I got more important stuff to do. So what I suggest is if you're not going to value it, if you're not going to make it count, don't bother doing it. Because I'm not going to see any value in that. And I'm not the kind of person that says, teach to the test or study for the test or all that, only if the test is testing the right stuff. But if you don't attach any value to it, don't expect the student to. So think about that. That's kind of step 1. Step 2 is determine what the criteria are. So that's usually some kind of a rubric. And you'll see an example for yours in a moment. But basically, how much attention do you want on the content aspects of reflection, the process, and we called it here, some people also ask for presentation points, was it clearly written, etc. But what's your grading rubric looking like? If you're going to give 5 points, what does the student have to do to get it? Okay? That should reflect the learning objectives of the assignment. And then the third step, let's not even go through this one, the third step is the scoring. So if I'm going to give you, if a reflective assignment is 10 points and you're going to get 3 points for content reflection, what do you have to do to get all 3 points versus 2 versus 1? Okay? So basically, that's what I was going to cover from the packet. And those of you doing the worksheet, if you have empty spaces down here, that should tell you something that you can improve on next time you deliver a reflective assignment. Any questions on the basics?
I can see the distinction. Are we working with them on reflecting or the reflection? Because one is more like your literary writing professor. Do you work up? The doing has to be in process. It has to be interactive. But then they produce an artifact that they hand to us for us to grade. And my preference actually is the interactive rather than the product. But the product is going to be easier to systematically look at.
You could look at both, but it's a different rubric, right? Yeah. So if you're interested in the interactive, you would have some kind of a checklist type thing, or you have a different scoring system for the quality of the interaction. So you may see in the future, we haven't gotten that far yet, like a team contribution rubric or scoring that you could use. But this is on the individual reflection that you're asking somebody to do.
Because in the interaction, I will ask genuinely hard questions and see how they respond to it. And that's more enlivening, I guess, for me. guess.
But you're right, they're two different things, and you could have a situation where you're evaluating or assessing both of the student.
Yeah.
For this purpose tonight, we're talking about the actual reflection. So if you would now take this document that is stapled and has a lot of written material, we're going to give you some practice.
Can I ask a dumb question?
There's no dumb questions. No, you can't ask a dumb question.
It sounds like what we're being asked to do is run a reflective section that takes 3 hours at the end of a week of something. And that's what we're asking the students to reflect on?
No, we're
I'm
going to go
really
through
confused.
exactly what you're going to be asked to do.
Excellent.
Okay?
Thank you.
So you'll be totally comfortable by the time you walk out of the room.
I know how to ask it, but I don't know what I'm asking them to reflect on.
Right. Good transfer. Thank you. So, you have the page that says Foundations Block, Week 1, Professional Development Session, a week of working in teams. Looks like this. It's in your packet. I know there's a lot of paper. We killed several trees.
It's in this packet?
No, it's not in that package. Oh, I did help her find it. It's right there. I saw it. Can you pick that up?
I
Yes.
have a question. I thought the professional part of this was not grading students. Is that true?
Say that again, Fran.
I thought that that part of there are different classes of instructors, and
right.
I think that the professionalism people aren't grading students. Is that true?
I think there's a complicated answer to that question, and that's that. We divide the class into 6 learning communities, each of which has approximately 30 students, and within each learning community there are 3 or 4 small groups. Professional development mentors that are attached to a specific group don't grade that group. But when that group submits reflections, other mentors from that same learning community can grade them. What we're trying to do is to keep separate the role of coach versus the role of evaluator. And that's the way we're moving to doing this.
So the students that we work with, we would not grade, but we might grade another.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Grade it all,
So
or
you're
just
ending up
grade on these
grading on a
reflective?
written report then? Yeah, not on a rather than on what you've seen.
It's a little less biased.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So the grade that you would give is based solely on the written material that the student submits, not on what you have seen them doing.
That's correct.
Right, that was the distinction that I can't say his name was making. You could have a separate assessment of the team work, but that's not what we're talking about tonight, okay? So this is, everybody has this now? Yeah?
Are you saying that we will not be grading students on reflections in our own group? Or are you saying that as mentors in this PD class overall, we're not grading students on anything?
Now, what I'm saying is that in your learning community, if there are 4 groups, the grading that you'll be doing will be not the group
On
you'll be
students that
coaching.
are not group. So we're still going to be submitting the grades at some point?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's practice that to get you a little more comfortable. So this is the end, we're going to read this together, okay? This is the end of Foundations Block Week 1, first week of the medical school curriculum, okay? I'm right at the top of the page.
It was in the clip section.
Okay, everybody have it? Okay, so this session occurs at the end of Foundations Block Week 1. We've listed the learning objectives for that whole session, okay? The students are going to complete a team building activity in their small groups.
With us helping them do
No,
it?
by themselves,
Gotcha.
okay?
Okay.
They're going to reflect as a group about what helped their team. They're going to build a newspaper tower, or a tower out of newspapers, okay? They're going to reflect as a group about what helped their team and what could have been done better, etc. And they're going to be asked to generate a list of principles for positive teamwork. And then they're going to convene as a learning community to consolidate their lists and compare what they identified to what's in the literature on teamwork, which is on your second page and which we're not really concerned about tonight, but it's there for you. Okay? So going back to the first page, the students are then going to be asked, this is the assignment, this is your job. They're going to be asked to write a reflection statement about their own performance as a team member throughout the week. That's the second learning objective. They're practicing reflection to self-assess their reflection and to put that reflection statement in their learning portfolios, which they will have learned how to do by the time they get to you. The questions that they're being asked to prompt the reflection are these three. Identify an incident where you made a positive contribution to a team today or sometime during the week. Describe what you did and why you did it and how it benefited the functioning of the team. Identify an incident where you didn't make a positive contribution to a team or as much as you wanted to, and do the same thing. Then, ta-da, look at the two incidents. And we didn't use the word reflect, but what do those two incidents tell you about yourself as a team member? What do you want to improve as a team member? So it's all about you, the student, and your performance as a team member. And it's less than a page.
And this has to do with building a tower out of newspaper.
The tower is the activity that will immediately precede it, but they can reflect on any teamwork thing they did all week. You don't want them talking about how they were on a team in high school, okay? You want it to be since they walked through the portal of Ross Hall, since they became a medical student here. Okay, so that's the assignment. Yes?
And when are we are meeting with them after they have done this?
It's the timing check.
Right. The way the newspaper tower exercise is set up is it's going to be on the Friday of their first week. Can you hear me in the back? It's going to be on the Friday of their first week. It's an exercise that's going to be mentored by the learning community leaders only. You will see the products of their work, but you won't actually mentor the building the towers exercise.
Can we watch them while they do it?
But you can if you like. And then you'll get that, and you'll get their reflections, and you'll be asked to assess them.
Okay. So, using this rubric on the next page.
So they're going to write these assessments that Friday?
Yes,
yes.
in place.
Yes.
And then when we meet them on Monday, the 11th, we're going to be reading these reflections?
No, you will.
Oh, this is at the end of.
Right.
Right. Their time block is 1 to 4 on Friday for all of this activity. So here's the rubric. You'll notice three things, couple things. First of all,
Page 1, which is page 3.
the third page
of our.
Okay, everybody got it? So first of all, it has kind of levels. It's mimicking the levels. It has the description, the analysis, and the plan change. And then it's got points, 3, 2, or 1. So it tells you what do you have to do to have proficiently described your answers to those 3 questions. What do you have to do to be partially proficient? And what do you get 1 point for because you wrote something but you really weren't proficient at all? So again, going back to if they don't know what you want, they can submit anything and get the check mark. So this is a very simple grading rubric for a reflection assignment. In the packet that I stopped going through, at the end, you have a whole compendium of reflection rubrics for all different sorts of things. Learning portfolios over time, observations, critical incident reviews. They're all solid tools. But I'm not going to go through those. I'm not going to worry about them. Jim and I developed this one, trying to keep it as simple as possible. Okay?
So will the students have a copy of this?
Yes. They'll have the questions and they'll have the rubric. Because
Right,
if they don't have a copy of the rubric, we've been naughty and we haven't done what we said we were supposed to do in letting them know what it was we were getting after.
And in their first reflection exercise on that Friday, they'll have a copy of the rubric, and they will actually self-assess using that rubric their own reflection, so they get a real in-depth feeling for what is done.
Okay?
And then when do we do this assessment?
We will give you guidelines about that, but what we have set up is what we are setting up is a portfolio system. And what happens is that the student will submit the reflection in the portfolio, an electronic portfolio, and you will have access to that portfolio. And you'll be able to see on your home computer just what the reflection looks like.
So we do this at home?
You can do it at home or anywhere else
on
you
our,
like.
we don't do it during our mentor
Correct.
time?
No.
Correct.
Okay?
It strikes me there's going to be a significant lag time between when they complete this assignment and when we give them feedback on it. So, given the fact that feedback close to the event is more meaningful than feedback delivered later.
You're not giving them feedback on their behavior, remember? You're giving them feedback on their thought process. So you're not giving them feedback on what you saw occur as they were building the newspaper. It's a little different than giving feedback on a clinical interaction where, you know, they did something not so hot with that patient interaction and you want to give them the feedback right away. It's a little bit different. This is a written document. Okay? Let's go through the exercise, and then that'll probably even give you more questions. But let's get to putting you to work. So just briefly, if you look at this rubric on the description, if you read across from 1, 2, and 3, so like you're reading Hebrew from right to left with me, okay, across the page. So the student wrote something that described what occurred, but they didn't focus on their own actions, which happens a lot when they first start writing reflections. So they're talking about everybody else but them. The group did this, the group did that, Sally did this, Joe did that. The reflection's about them. So they get 1 point. It's not proficient because it wasn't the assignment. Okay? Partially proficient, they describe what occurred and what they did. They're the writer, but they don't really explain their rationale for their actions. Number 3, they tell you what happened, they tell you what they did, and they tell you why they did it. Okay? So part of this, too, is training the students to be concise about their reflections, which means they actually have to think before they write. In the analysis stage, so we asked them to analyze what they did. The statement doesn't include an appraisal of how what they did impacted on the team's functioning. I'm starting at number 1. So we asked that question. They didn't talk about how their behavior impacted on the team. In the second one, they provide an appraisal of the impact, but they don't really explain things fully. Why wasn't it? So I had a positive impact on the team. Why? What did you do? Or what did you not do that had a bad impact? And then finally, in number 3, what you're shooting for, they provide an appraisal of what they did, why their actions were or were not effective, against the principles that they developed for good teamwork, which they will have developed. So if they do something and basically they said, well, Alicia hasn't talked very much, I'd like to hear from her. That's a principle of good teamwork because you're including everybody. So if they don't relate it to some of these principles that they identified, they don't get the full credit. And then where Adam's coming from, the plan change on number 1 in the lower right-hand corner, the statement doesn't identify anything they plan to do. So they wrote up their reflection, they analyzed it, but they're not going to change anything. So we'll give them a point because they wrote it up. Okay? Partially proficient, they identify some changes, but they're somehow inconsistent or they're not fully descriptive, or they say something like, I identified a bunch of things that I can do to improve my communication. But they don't tell you what they are. And number 3, they tell you what they're going to do, and they tell you, you know, how, and there's a logic from their analysis of what they didn't do well to this. So recognizing that, the first couple of times you do this, you could get a very wide range of scoring. But if you don't have a rubric that you're using consistently over time, and Jim plans on using this type of rubric consistently over time in the professional development course or theme, okay? The students will get used to this and so will you. So we've written up 3 cases, and we'd like you in your groups, and actually I think it'd be better half a table and half a table. So if you want to subdivide, because it's just too many people, you're not going to hear each other. So if you could just subdivide, and let's just take reflection writing assignment number 1, okay? So read it and work with your group to score it. So you should be coming up with 3 numbers. Is everybody clear what they're doing?
Yeah, let me just state something. Remember, we asked them to reflect on any activity which they experienced over the week. So one of the reflections that you'll see will be on the Oliver Mann exercise, and 2 of them will be on the tower building exercise.
Okay? So don't worry about the Oliver Mann's on the first day. You don't need to know what it is. You're not creating content.
We're not doing this.
Okay?
This comes later.
So what you're doing, what you should be doing right now is reading number 1.
I mean,
Have your attention for a minute.
Listen up.
What you should be doing right now is reading reflection number 1 to yourself. And then when you're all done with your half of the table, going to the rubric and discussing how you would score it.
this is number 1.
This is a reflection.
We're grading it. There you go.
Okay. So we're going to do.
Just read the first one, don't read any more. We're going to do them one at a time. So when you're done, just start the conversation with your friends.
You're lost.
Wow. Yeah.
So I guess we do description first.
I didn't even know I was involved in this. I had no idea. I remember this.
More doesn't necessarily mean good.
What's that?
More does not
Right,
necessarily mean
right.
good.
Oh, right, right.
One could
I
argue
think that what I know about that is how very
because they
Are we
did
ready?
assess and they were
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's not it didn't get into the why, so we're not another 6 that I would give it
Nonetheless, we just start right with the description. So like do the statement describes what and then it's partially
You could deduce that she was trying to describe by suggesting compromise and that compromise, but that's not really what.
Of the description.
And then the
Right.
I'd say part of
Yeah, so would it make it easy to do this way is not sufficient in the direction of the rules of others? I think about I will talk a little bit about the surgeon's dad was the surgeon, and that's what he was doing. I think that is
What to do is
the rationale for those, but it's not something you can their rationale for those actions. Yeah, it sounds like those rationales, others talking about
So the assignment, so this is what we're doing. This is the session. So I have you on August the 15th. We're all doing this exercise. Now the man exercises are on the
I give it many
It's going.
I mean, I don't think you guys have to do this wrong. I'm just saying, no, it seems to me that is really the rationale for that.
Alright, for pauses. What is so almost all of the stuff. That's what in other words,
that maybe is for the discussion. But it's okay
But to some extent, it is describing.
Yes, and then it right, but no analysis is why. There wasn't a
I would argue what you have done differently is certainly get in a way.
I agree with that. No, I don't think she made it. Just that I'm really good. Number one. This is number one. Well, wait a minute, I thought that I was getting to this. You get insight into what you do. But it's
That's actually, we're not, this is not a style of
Okay, 2 minutes. 2 minutes
I really didn't like it. I didn't even share it yet. So I turned myself off watching the picture. I didn't want to be embarrassed because I don't like it. I don't care who it is.
You're only doing the first one. We need to go faster. Okay, you have a score?
You read my mind that I was going to ask.
Okay. Please stop wherever you are. Okay, please stop wherever you are. So for the first one, what did you give him? What did you give him? 4? First one, description. How many gave him a 1? Ooh.
How about 1.5?
1.5. How many gave him a 2? Did anybody give him a 3? Okay. So a 3 would mean the statement was a concise description of what occurred, the person's actions, and the rationale for those actions. So there seemed to be a lot of people in the room that did not think a 3 was deserved. Somebody who did not give it a 3, why not?
It was not concise. No.
Exactly. It was pretty darn long, wasn't it? Okay, and what else?
Rationale wasn't explicit.
Yeah, there was no rationale. I think this. Well, why do you think that? I think it was a good compromise. Why? Okay? So probably it was somewhere around a 2 or a 1.5 or somewhere in there. It probably was more than a 1 because there was a description. Right. Right? Okay? So it wasn't like they didn't describe it, and they did focus on their own actions, even though they talked about the group, but they did not only talk about the group, they talked about themselves too. So it's probably in that 2 arena. Now, more important than what you labeled it, if you wanted that person to get to a 3 on the description, what kind of feedback would you give them to promote them getting towards the 3? And the best feedback is in the form of a question. So what would you say to this person to try to get them, let's say they were at a 2, to try to get them to a 3?
What change, knowing the criteria, would you make in your write-up to be able to get a 3?
Okay, so you're sort of asking them to self-diagnose. Go ahead.
I would ask why they thought it was a good compromise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because what's missing is the rationale for the action. So good feedback might underline that piece that says, and their rationale for the action, and indicating that that wasn't there, and then say, what was your rationale? Okay? Not so hard. Analysis. Where did you rank them on the analysis? Anybody give them a 3? Good. Anybody give them a 2? Okay. In fairness, going like this. So the rest of you were all 1s. So those of you that gave them a 1, why did you?
His description of the team functioning seemed very atomized and fragmented and didn't seem to be describing any awareness of how the team was functioning.
But an analysis of that in and of itself would have been interesting. To say that the fact that a team made up of disparate experts has a very hard time coming to consensus in and of itself would have been a good.
The person says, I think most people are reasonable and looking for a good win-win solution to tough problems, etc. And I haven't seen too much of that around here. So there really isn't a lot of analysis, it's just opinion. So it probably is more towards a 1 than a 2. Okay? Now, if you gave them a 2, you're not wrong, you're just an easy grader. The point is, how are you going to get them to a 3?
Our discussion for why we thought it might be a 2 was that we thought that paragraph was actually an analysis of his reasoning for why he proposed the compromise. So that and not that it was a clear one, but that it at least gave some of the reasons for why he.
Okay, so let's go with your thought. So if you thought that, what kind of feedback might you give the person?
In the form of a question.
You just actually take what you just said, Susan, and turn it into a question.
So one brings it to clarify the question that was asked before. What is your rationale for the compromise, and how does that connect to what you said in the second paragraph?
Yeah.
And then also, how does that relate to the functioning of the whole group in order to broaden it more?
Yeah, and you said you couldn't tell if it was his, you were reading into it that it was his reasoning, but you weren't sure if it was his reasoning or the team's. So the question might be, was this your reasoning or the team's? Don't make it too hard, right? So you just gave us the answer to if you want him to get to a 3 on the analysis, okay? So on the plan change, what did you give the person? A 3? No. A 2? Good. Okay. So there is no plan change. That was the point. So let's say you want them to get here. What are you going to say? What's the feedback going to be?
What did you learn from your experience? And what did
And
you do differently?
what are you going to do differently next time? Okay? So you get the hang of this? Somewhat?
Somewhat.
Somewhat. Okay? So the idea is not really to be perfect on your grading, but to get used to using the rubric and to be able to move the student towards the 3 by giving them feedback. In this case, they're going to get the points for doing the assignment, but it's going to be much more meaningful than just checking it off and saying they got 5 points, because they're going to see that they weren't reflecting as deeply as they could have, and you're going to give them feedback to push them towards this end. So they're not going to, it's not a matter of they're going to get 2 + 1 + 1 and they got 4 points for the assignment. They're still going to get the full credit for the assignment because they did it. Okay?
And I don't mean to play that. I guess I do mean to play that.
It's okay.
I read this first without reading the rubric, and then I went back to the rubric. And when I read it, I thought, actually, this is a pretty impressive reflection, because I wasn't so focused on the aspect of the outcome of the team. What I was focused on was the insight it takes to recognize the role one enjoys playing, to recognize the different roles that people take, to acknowledge that these are all win-win situations and that people come with good motives, even though they have different ideas of what to do, and to recognize that probably through this team experience, this individual is headed for a career in primary care. I think those are much more. No, I think that this person said that. I mean, they said that. I think those are.
Yeah, I mean,
it's really insightful.
Right, and to respond to that, there are people here. What was your feeling about this particular person? Someone mentioned arrogance.
Yeah, we
Judy?
didn't care for him very much. He seemed very proud of himself and the I'm above it all role that he was playing as the negotiator and the compromiser. And I never got the feeling that he found any kind of problem with his role, that he thought he did a pretty good job.
So you saw he was sort of self-ratifying then, as opposed to being insightful. So just two different views.
You want to be careful about what you're grading, because you could naturally bring a lot of things with you that you think the person should or could exemplify. So that's the beauty of sticking to the rubric.
Where in this, I mean, I'm just coming from clinical medicine right now. There's never any mention that somebody wanted to know what the man himself wanted. And so I'm very concerned that people were talking about process as if I'm in charge here. These are the decisions.
What was the assignment?
Does that fit into the way we ought to be looking at this?
Let me comment on that. The way it's just because the way the assignment is set up is that the clinician and the patient have already had a conversation. The clinician has, the patient has given his views, and he just isn't sure. And what he says is, I'm not sure what to do here. What would you suggest? You know me. What would you suggest? And that's how it's set up. So the assumption is that conversation is already happened.
But that's not what you were asked to write about. So you have to
where
go
I'm
back
missing.
to the assignment on the first page, which was identify an incident where you made a positive contribution to a team. It wasn't where you treated a patient the best you could have, etc. Okay? And I am not saying that's not important, but that wasn't this assignment. So you really have to have the assignment in mind. Because that's what I mean when I say you could bring a lot of other things. You could say, I don't see a lot of compassion in here. Or I do see a lot of compassion, and that's great, but that's not what the assignment was about. Ready to try another one? Okay, so read number 2. Do the same thing. 3 numbers.
Line 2 is funny already.
Yeah, and it's also.
I went along with everything. So, whereas the other person spent 3/4 describing this was
Sally will be our
She did say, if I did say, if I
you know, the one place where I would actually encourage a little bit more last week was how to whatever reason
We're ready for number 2. Does anyone hear me? Hello?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, how did Kate do? Her name's
Better than
Kate.
the other guy.
Better than the other guy. Okay. You notice we didn't name the other guy. You assumed it was a guy. You did, okay?
Spy said
Okay, let's take them one at a time on the description. A 1, a 2, a 3. Okay, generally everybody's together with that. There was 1, 2. No,
You gave me 2.5.
she's taking it back. I'm sorry?
We did 2.5.
2.5. So what was it that you didn't quite like?
She could have been more concise.
Okay, so your feedback might be, what? Next time, try being a little more concise, or could you have been more concise, or you want to put it in some form of a question,
How might
right?
you have been a little more, maybe this one a little more compact?
But aren't we sort of like forcing, I mean, it can't be more than a page.
So, yeah,
We've got limits on
it.
age, you know.
It's not too bad. Yeah.
But that's an important question. Are we really grading on writing style as well, or?
Is that in the rubric? Okay, then you're not grading on it.
Dangling participles, you can't.
No, exactly.
I want to make it very clear that I didn't write this.
The other thing too that came up in our group is that the concise part only is relevant to the description of what happened. It's not that their writing has to be concise.
Yeah.
So in the previous reflection, the description took 3/4 of the page, and the analysis was on the other quarter. In this, yes, you potentially could have tightened it up, but she concisely described exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So the whole thing doesn't have to be concise.
Great.
It's just the action.
Great, thank you. So again, the importance of reading the rubric. Seema.
So I think maybe I got lost in the semantics. So when it said concise, I thought like the quotations are very powerful to describe what happens, but she used them sort of at the quotations even where it was not actually adding anything. If anything, it was detracting, I thought, from what she was trying to say.
Are you grading on grammar?
No, but it's a concise issue.
But it's a dumb issue rather than.
So then you might say, did you need all those quotations? That might be your feedback in the form of a question, okay?
Sometimes people use quotations because they're expecting you are going to understand what they mean by what some other person said.
But we're not here to analyze their motives.
But it could have been that she should have, rather than use quotes, had analyzed what was meant by those quotes.
Can I suggest making the rubric slightly more concise by removing the word concise?
That was a very important word to the rubric writers, because usually you tend to get at the beginning exactly what Matt was describing, that there's this description and then there's, a one-sentence analysis and a half a sentence on play and change.
Yeah.
So concise is kind of important. So I think we feel that we'd like to try it with it in and see if we get concise statements or not. Okay, how did Kate do on the analysis? A 1, a 2, couple 2s, a 3. Okay, so those of you that gave her a 2, what did you feel was lacking? What would your feedback be to get to a 3?
I was impressed with her own self-knowledge. She seemed to have an idea of why she did what she did and how the baggage she brought to the incident.
Did you give her a 2 or a 3?
I would give her 2.5.
Okay. So you just told me what she did, but what would get her to a 3 in your mind?
I'd like her to come up with something about how she would change. She evidently feels she's shy and she says she freezes.
But we're talking about the analysis, not the change. Okay, so somebody who gave her a 2 on analysis, what question would you pose to her to make her go a little towards the 3?
What are you going to do about your reticence to step forward and put your ideas?
That's change.
That's in the plan change category.
Why was it difficult for her to get a little bit more involved with these guys building this tower?
So you might say, could you say a little bit more about why it was difficult for you to get more involved?
See, I would argue that she said it all. She just talked about her background. And,
I didn't give her a 2.
I understand that. But it's a good. The question is a good acid test. That's a good acid test. If you're struggling between 2 and 3, then what's the question that you're asking? And if you can't think of it, then maybe it's a 3.
Yeah, it's a good acid test.
And now that I know what is expected from this, I give her a 3.
Right. So I would have asked her to, in the future, think more about the impact on the team.
Okay.
She mentions the impact on the team, but most of it's about the impact on her. And because of that imbalance in the way she described it, her action is all about herself and nothing about what she could have done to the team.
So you might say?
So I would say, think more about what it meant to the team and therefore what you would do to help your teammates learn from your impact.
Great.
Because they have no opportunity to learn
Right.
basically from her current behavior plan.
So that could be very good feedback to get her if you think she's at the 2 stage. She's clearly not at 1. And there are going to be times when you're between the numbers. So asking yourself, what would I want to see that I'm not seeing might flip you one way or another. And if you're not going to go to a 3, then you've got to come up with a question that's going to tell the student what they need to do to move to that level. Okay? Yeah?
You could also get her to reflect on how her withholding her insight and knowledge and contribution may affect her medical career, not just her newspaper tower building career.
Right.
So she puts it.
But I would say that, remember, the reflection assignment needs to relate to your comments need to relate to the assignment.
The assignment was just about teamwork?
The assignment was whatever she selected.
Okay.
So this was not a question about how do you think your performance on teams will affect your medical career, but that's an excellent question for maybe the end of year 1. So we should keep that in mind. Thank you. Okay, so again, you have to kind of be careful about what was the question the student was asked to do, what was the assignment, and then the rubric. What is the rubric measuring? Any other questions on analysis? Yeah.
I think that our discussion is leading to the idea that there are plenty of worthwhile ideas that could be generated in a group discussion, but the rubric helps us to focus on the specific skills we want the students to be developing.
Right, and this one is about teamwork.
Why not do a reflection template so they don't accidentally, so that it's more explicit, where the template is not just write a page, but the template says describe concisely what happened, analyze it in terms of what the question is,
yeah,
teamwork, whatever, and what do you propose to improve, or what's your plans for improvement? Why not just do that?
Remember the very first time they were exposed to this, the reflection exercise, they actually get this rubric.
They do get it.
Yeah, they do get it.
Oh.
So it gives them just what you were talking about.
The problem with having, though, a standardized rubric that they use for every single thing is that there are better rubrics for critical incident reflections, for example. There are better rubrics for observations. So, it's a little more sophisticated than just a reflection. So we were actually trying to create, Jim put a lot of pressure on me to create something that could be, used sort of over and over again, and it was very, very difficult. It took me 5 hours to write this rubric. It's not that easy.
So it had to be general enough.
But it had to be, we were aiming for something that was general enough that it could be used for several other assignments, which we haven't, of course, developed yet. But at the same time, it had to work for a teamwork assignment. So if you after the session, if you have a chance to go through the packet, in the back, as I mentioned before, there's a whole bunch of sample rubrics, and they're for different types of assignments.
We also wanted to be general enough so that students, when they had an experience throughout the semester, they could actually choose a critical event that happened to them, and they could use this rubric to structure the description of that critical event. So it's not just an assignment necessarily coming from us. It could come from them also, from their personal experience.
So let's do the last one, the plan change. What did you give her? How many gave her 1? 2. Most of the room. 3? A few 3s, okay? Those of you that gave her a 2, what did you want to see? Excuse me, that you didn't.
More specific, depending on how she was going to make herself speak up on it, not just, I'm thinking of trying it.
Right. Right. So next time I'm thinking of trying it. Okay, well, do you know when next time is? When might next time be? Okay, what exactly are you thinking of trying? Those might be some questions then that you would give her. Any other questions on this one? We have one more, so go ahead.
We also wondered about asking if she was stuck, then a question that talked about where might you find how might you come up with next steps, like talking to you, which might elicit answers like talking to the group.
Yeah, let me elaborate on that.
Okay.
We had the impression that she didn't say very much about a plan for change because she couldn't picture a plan. She appears not to have too much of a clue how she could possibly overcome all this shyness. So our impression was she didn't omit it because she didn't think to elaborate on it. She couldn't elaborate on it because she didn't have those ideas to put them down. So we didn't want to grade her on not knowing what to do.
right? We also don't want to be, no offense to anybody, too much of a psychologist trying to figure out what's really going on here. I hope you're not a psychologist. Oh, great. Okay, well, no offense.
You give a carpenter a hammer
and everything's nailed, right? Okay, so again, she does say, you know, I think I have a lot to contribute, but don't know how to do it. So she's actually been maybe more explicit than you might be giving her credit for. She's telling you she doesn't know how to do it. So your feedback could just relate right to that line and say, what would help you figure this out?
Which is what we
Something
said.
like that, okay? So you're picking up on a good point in it. You're staying within the confines of the assignment by making her come back with something. Okay, so you're still pushing her reflection.
No, you're pushing her development.
You're pushing her development, yeah. Okay?
Can we coach her in the small group?
Jim, you want to answer that? So if Kate was a real person and you read this, can they coach her?
Yeah, absolutely.
But the group leaders wouldn't be reading that. It would be a different student from your group.
Yes, but you know, in your feedback, you're in effect coaching her. And also, I mean, ideally, there'd be this eventually may develop. You'd have a back and forth exchange electronically like this.
Well, we also said that that she could probably, like, for example, role playing might be really a good way for her to develop this, and we could say that in the feedback, and she could go speak to her mentor and maybe do something.
Right.
Yeah. What?
What? Can we refer her to our colleagues?
Yeah, definitely. Would you like me to help you? Right. Okay, we have one last one. It's shorter. It's much more concise. So have at it. Better. Sounds like we're more able to be.
No, there's the whole legend here. Too, but ideas of it. Let's start to think about you like let's think about how we should do this. That's right.
I wrote my answer to I mean, it is, so they're actually a very successful person. Of course,
you guys ready? Those one question about it. I wasn't sure, like, I wasn't sure about the rationale for why did
Yeah, I agree, that's a good matter, is that you yeah, I mean, you know, started by giving out
He says what he's doing.
What I would love to see that's how it's going to be done. Yeah, it literally is.
Are you providing?
All right. Are we ready for number 3?
Yes, right.
All right. So this is the person with the positive personality, right?
Yeah.
So on the description, how many people gave them a 3? Wow, almost everybody? A 2? A 1? So the 2s, what would you want them to do to have gotten a 3?
There's something like the rationale for why this person decided, like this person says, having no great ideas about how to go about this, I just pulled this out of a hat. I mean, it wasn't like really, was this something that they'd seen, work well before, something that they were curious about trying? I don't know. I just wanted a little more depth to that.
Yeah, you wanted something more than
like why that approach?
Okay.
Yes.
That's kind of what we thought, that it should have a little bit more depth to it.
So what we were saying is, what would Ellen say, which is, like, you would ask a question, like, in other words, well, no, I'm joking because I heard it. It's like, well, what was your rationale behind this? That would be the next question to ask them.
Good description, not much rationale.
Right.
You had a comment, Chris?
I mean, this is a teamwork exercise, and his approach or her approach or whoever is nothing but a teamwork approach. This is perfect.
He's very inclusive.
Well, that said, I agree, but my criticism of it was that it was too much of a team write-up because it was such a mass of it, that it was indistinguishable as to who contributed what. So instead of saying, we discussed the pros and cons and decided to borrow the bet, who decided that? Who got upset? Which one was the one who differed? Even though it was a team approach, there was no distinguishing of the individuals.
Okay. That might have been a little tough, but the 2s, I think, could have used a question like, why did you decide to have everybody take their turn? Did you think that there were different opinions in the group? Were you trying to get different opinions out from the group? So what prompted you to do it that way versus to put an idea of your own on the table and say, give me your reactions, which is a different kind of team approach, right?
I thought it was because they didn't have an idea. That's how they didn't put an idea on the table. I think we're not critiquing.
They had no ideas about how to go about it.
It's just a process.
But they could have said, so I didn't have an idea, so I suggested we all put forward our ideas so we could really, so we could all put our brains to this project and develop it more creatively.
Which I sort of, it's
implicit.
Get dinged for whatever.
I think we were having a discussion between the 2s and the 3s, and those of us who did 3s, I think we assumed that they suggested the round robin because no one was talking, but that wasn't specifically stated.
Yeah.
And so maybe there wasn't enough context for the rationale that they were trying to get at, but they just didn't give enough to it.
So you could also say to them then, can you tell me more here about what was going on? Okay? Analysis. A 1? Nobody. A 3? A couple people. Half the room again. A 2. Ooh, we're split right down the middle there. Okay, those of you that gave the analysis a 2, what would you have wanted to see?
More detail.
Of anything in particular? Because if your feedback to me was, if I'm the student and the feedback says, I need more detail, or give me more detail, I might read it and say, about what I thought I did. So you need to be a little more specific there. John?
How did you help the group decide who does what?
Okay.
And I would just go back to that, how it occurred, how you wanted it to occur. One thing that we discussed in our group is that it almost seems that they took the room rubric and then gave a very formulaic answer of how to get a 9 sort of on this. Right. But because they technically did get a 9 if you look at it sort of just the rubric verbatim. But it's almost like a person highly motivated to succeed with the assignment rather than actually giving a lot of insight to process or how to get out, what to get out of it or how to improve.
And also, what if, like, you know, everybody was in agreement and hunky-dory, but like the tower was, you know, like a foot tall and fell over. You know, it doesn't really talk about, you know, maybe ensuring that that the best ideas are really accepted, not just the most popular ideas. You know what I mean? Just there's a little more analysis that could have been done to.
Are you grading the outcome?
Well, we got second place. Pretty good.
Well, what I would like, what I mean is, let me rephrase. What I mean is, I think that this person could have acknowledged, as you know, a little bit like that. This situations where this sort of approach maybe isn't like useful or the best approach or something like that.
Okay. Or it could have been, when I was in a situation like this before and nobody had an idea what to do, we all went around and gave our best thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a little more context to why they suggested what they suggested.
Yeah, or I wanted to be really inclusive, or I know from experience that certain persons who, when they don't speak up, we lose out because we don't get great ideas. So I think it's really important that everyone has a chance to contribute, something along those lines.
Okay, Seema?
Good. Just a thought. Somebody mentioned that we're going to be giving them this rubric. And someone else observed that this almost looks like it was written to the rubric. Does anyone else have that concern that our highly motivated students who are very eager to please will write things that they think because they sort of know what we're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really an important place for feedback because people who do more sophisticated rubrics, they talk about authentic voice. That it's really someone that's really coming from a person who you know is coming from that person, as opposed to someone who's being formulaic, is like strategic.
Okay, last one, plan change. How many gave him a 1? A 2? A 3? Okay, those of you that gave it a 2, what would you want to see more of?
I think that she says, I thought I made some good contributions, especially keeping us organized. It would have been, I think, good to hear how she accomplished that.
Okay, that might be more in the analysis then. Okay.
Let's see more specific learning that he derived from the exercise.
Okay, so he says, I made specific notes about some of the things that the other team member did that I liked. Okay, well, what was in them? Right? You know? Give me the dirt here. And plan to try them out myself. What ones are you going to try?
And why?
And why? So we were trying in these, none of these are perfect, as you obviously know. So our goal was to create one that number 1 was sort of a 2-1-1. It was a not very good response to the assignment. That was how we scored it. And we scored it separately. 3 of us scored it separately. Okay? That was number 1. That's number 1. For number 2, we scored it 3-3-2. Okay, which you came close to. And for the last one, we scored it right down the middle, straight 2s. Okay. Just so you know. So that was how we approached it. But again, okay, I know you're getting restless, but we're also almost done. Again, is it as important or more important from my vantage point of the scoring is the feedback. And how are you going to get the student to move forward? Okay?
Are we giving written feedback? Or
are you going to get?
Are we giving the students
written feedback?
Yes.
So there's a place to say why or rationale in the text?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm incredibly impressed by your inter-rater reliability. Unlike us as a group, and because I am certainly a novice at this, as a historian, I would worry about my, I hope I can give comments under any conditions that would help students. I would be very worried about my grade being stakes in the game.
Yeah.
To begin with, until we all get calibrated, maybe. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't worked out the exact detail of how we do that, but we're really aware of that, and we're going to be very careful. Yes, I mean, to really get inter-rater reliability amongst this group, we have to do this again and again and again, and then finally we'd be relatively reliable. Absolutely right. But we're not going to penalize students for our inter-rater non-reliability.
Like, I would be happy at the beginning to write a comment on their description, their analysis, and their change, and not attach it to a score.
I think we would really suggest that you attach it to a score because it's going to give more seriousness to the student. And it's also going to prompt them, if I got a 2, next time I want to get a 3. So we need to work out the impact of your score on the grade. But we are suggesting that you give them a score of a 2, 3, or a 1, 2, or 3, as well as the comments.
And when we do this the first time, whatever we end up doing, the first time will be completely wrong. So that even though you'll give them the points, it'll be the first time the faculty are doing this for real, it'll be the first time the students are doing it for real. So it will not count. So we'll go through that exercise, and that'll also probably give us some very important information on how this works.
But they won't be told that it doesn't count.
What's that?
They won't be told that it doesn't count.
For the first time they are.
Yeah, we're absolutely transparent about that.
Question here?
Yeah. One person at a time, please.
The other practice and medicine course, we're limited in the number of A's or equivalent we can do. Is that true with this?
No.
No, there's no grading on a curve.
No.
For the whole thing or just for the reflection?
The whole thing.
You know what I'm referring to, right?
Any sort of grading we do.
The
overall
outstandings for the last.
Right. There should not be there will not be a system of that sort within this context.
So if we think all of the students deserve an A or the equivalent, we could give them all an A. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is, let me modify that. Within the professional development theme, when it comes to grading, what will happen is that students will submit 2 grading, 2 debriefs to you. And those 2 debriefs will be graded by you. And the student's grade for professional development will depend upon your grading of those 2 debriefs, period.
So it doesn't have
You're
to
not
do
getting
with
the
class
story.
participation
Right,
or,
exactly, because that's going to be graded and put in the skills and reasoning.
Okay.
So what is a debrief?
What is a debrief? A debrief is an episode of self-directed learning. So that, for example, if a student does a reflection on building towers, that plus the reflection, plus a plan to how to do things better, plus an individualized learning plan about exactly what they're going to do in the future, and also a way to evaluate whether or not they've succeeded in doing that.
When is this going to happen?
And what's that?
When is this going to happen? Is this
Every
happening
time-
in all these little pieces?
Every time a student goes through a block, they will be submitting 2 debriefs to you to be graded.
Which has like 5 components in it?
What do you mean by that?
You said a learning plan, a reflection on it, a change plan, or is it one paper that this person writes?
The rubric that we've showed you is the rubric that's going to be used in your grading process. But we haven't gone over the whole thing in any detail. But what will happen in the intercessions is that you will meet individually with your students and have a chance to help them come up with a specific individualized learning plan, and also to set up criteria for seeing how well they succeeded in achieving that plan. So the idea is that through debrief after debrief after debrief, they will gradually identify things that they want to work further on and address those particular things. So in that sense, the student takes control of his or her own learning.
I think I'm asking a practical question, not the philosophy of the pedagogy.
Yes.
Is this debriefing going to happen when we meet individually with them in the intersession? Or is this a portfolio that they submit to us?
It's a portfolio that they submit to you, which you will then review with them during the intersession. And we gave you a draft of the professional development curriculum guide, which is each of your seats. And take it home and look at it. There'll be stuff added to it, but it outlines exactly what sorts of things you're talking about. And when you have questions, just email me. But it lays it out there. Okay, as we wind down, does anyone have any other questions, practical or otherwise? Kathleen is here. Kathleen Klein is our administrative person. I'm here. If you have any other questions that I can try to answer, we can try to answer. Chris.
I'm sorry, you may have already gone over this, but where are we meeting? The schedule here? Where are we?
Okay, you have a schedule there, but you don't have specific rooms. Kathleen, you want to address that issue?
I have the schedule, but the most important part is day one, which is August 11th.
But in terms of room assignments, they don't know what rooms to go to.
For the first day?
For any of the days.
Okay, well, we can send out a chart.
We will send you out a room chart so you know where to go.
Schedule.
Where do they go on the first day? Do you know where they go on the first day?
They're going to be in 101.
So Ross 101.
Ross 101 the first day. We all meet in a large classroom on the first floor of Ross.
And that's August 11th.
Monday, August 11th.
August 11th. Monday, August 11th.
Okay. What is happening then? So we're all meeting.
Right. The question is, what's happening on Monday, August 11th?
Yeah.
What's going to happen, and this is, once again, this is outlined, because each session that we're doing for the fall semester is outlined in the packet that we gave you. But what's specifically happening on Monday, August 11th, is at 9 o'clock, between 9 and 9:20, everyone will be together, and I will give a general overview of what's happening in professional development for 20 minutes. They will then, the students will then assemble in their small groups with you. And the first thing that they'll do when they get together with you is there'll be an hour for introductions, so that each person will have a chance to introduce himself or herself. You'll have a chance to introduce yourselves. That will be followed by the Oliver Mann exercise. What's the Oliver Mann exercise?
Yeah, right.
The Oliver Mann exercise is students are given a patient, in quotation marks. It's a paper case. And it's a patient, it's a person who has colon cancer. And their mission is to advise that person about what to do next. The patient has discussed this with them, is a little confused about what to do, and the patient asks the students, what should I do next as far as addressing my colon cancer is concerned? And the exercise is set up so that students have instant knowledge packets so that they can take on various roles, like the role of the pathologist, the role of the anatomist, the role of the primary care doctor, the role of the hospitalist, of the hospice specialist, and the role of the oncologist and the role of the surgeon. And so they will have instant knowledge about how to address this. They'll have a chance to absorb these packets and then come together as a group and come to consensus on what their group recommends this particular patient might do. That's the exercise.
And that takes...
And I don't have the exact time in my head, but it's in there. It's in your packet. In your packet.
Are we a part of that?
And what's that? Yes.
Are we part of that?
Yes.
Sit there, we
Yes.
participate,
Yes.
watch?
Yes. You basically are facilitating this process. And then what happens is that after they've had a chance to come up with their recommendation for Oliver Mann, the small groups come together in their learning communities, and then in their learning communities, each small group reports out what their recommendation is for Oliver Mann. And then once they've reported out, the group leader will take that data and draw some conclusions from it about addressing patients and what's important about addressing patients, and that, for example, patients can have the same disease, and yet doctors might suggest very different approaches. Patients with the same disease might decide on very different courses depending upon, first of all, the pathology of the disease, how extensive it is. Secondly, on who they are as people and what they want out of their lives. And the exercise comes together, and that sort of is the take-home for the students. So they're now in learning communities, they've done the report out, and then the grand finale of the day is lunch. Okay? So from about 12 to 1:30, there's a lunch within the learning community. You will be there, and also we've invited the clinical skills and reasoning mentors to be there, and also the librarian consultants to be there, and also the medical science consultants to be there, so that way students will have a chance to meet almost everyone in their learning communities. So that's the morning.
And then from 1:30 to 2:15?
And then what happens after that is not professional development.
No, the rest is for students, and you go back to your jobs or homes, or there are other activities for you. Leave with the students stay.
A different topic. What can we expect on these days when the PDMIs are teaching with the CSRs?
Right. What
This is a new format.
It's within each group, PD group, there are two mentors. One mentor has special expertise in interviewing. So that mentor will attend the regular PD sessions, but will also attend the interview sessions, which fall within the realm of clinical skills and reasoning.
So there will basically be 3 mentors, and sometimes all 3 are together, and sometimes 2 are together.
Each small group of 8 medical students has essentially 3 mentors, meaning 2 professional development mentors and 1 clinical skills and reasoning mentor. I say essentially because sometimes some of us are doing dual duty, and we're both CSR mentors and professional development mentors. Other questions?
You have to interview 2 and 3. So you go 1 to 4.
Yeah. Interviews, what's happened is that the basic interviewing portion of the curriculum has been condensed into a very short period. And there are sessions 1, 2, 3, and 4. The clinical skills and reasoning mentors, which we designated as, the professional development mentors that we designated with the letter I, meaning special interviewing expertise, they go to sessions 1 and 4. Why don't they go to sessions 2 and 3? You can if you want to. But sessions 2 and 3, because of the complicated schedule, are off the times, off the usual time schedule. They're in the morning. So we thought that it might be an added burden for you to attend the morning session. But some people, like Dr. Frank in psychiatry, wants to attend those sessions. And it would be lovely if you wanted to. You don't have to. That's the reason.
You're going to be teaching with some people that we haven't had yet.
Correct. Or you might have, but you might not. Yes?
You mentioned that we're going through sort of a detailed curriculum about what happened in each session.
Yes.
Was that this time or last time? Or is it
That's the packet that you have.
this year?
Yes, this one.
Okay.
This one here says Professional Development Guide for Faculty and Students. This is a draft which outlines what happens in each session. You will get more detail, but this gives you the basic outline.
It doesn't have any dates on it, so it's hard to figure out exactly when things are happening.
There is, your point was it doesn't have any dates on it. This schedule here has dates on it.
Okay.
There's a grid which has the dates on it.
Okay.
So take a look at it, and I know it's not in the perfect form, but it
questions? All right, thank you very much for coming. I'll be here, Evelyn will be here.
Where is your office? All right, Phil.
My office is